How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed Dalet, Daf 34 of Masechta Shevuos, friends. Your friends. Maybe today's Daf won't be as long as the other ones. That would be nice. Last 3 days have been like an hour each on average or something like that. Maybe even slightly more. So, probably about an hour on average, something like that. I think it was like an hour and 7, 59, 55, something like that. So today's daf, we're going to continue. Right, yesterday at the end of the daf, we were discussing how do we know that Shevuos HaEidus is limited to mominous, money things specifically. We had several opinions. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yosef Glili, Rabbi Shimon. I think that was it. 4 opinions. I think just 4. We are going to delve into each of those 4 today. And the Daf Lamed Dalet Beis is basically for the most part, one big joke. And as you can imagine, it's a complicated joke. Don't expect to laugh. Let's go. Okay. Now, where are we? So we are on Daf Lamed Dalet Amid Aleph, about 10 lines into the Amid, where it says the word Maskif La Rabba. Well, the word Maskif and the phrase is Maskif La Rabba. Rabba is the last word on the line. You see it? I can tell you exactly. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I believe it's 12. If I counted correctly, it's 12 lines into the Amid. You ready? Maskif. Maskif La Rabba Bar Ula. Rabbi Bar Ula asks Akasha, oi, bitoy, 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 yochichu shein oin, v'yesh imoen shvuah v'nimoen koin, umedab shaloi b'tvias mammon. So Rabbi Eliezer's shita was, how do we know that by Shevuos HaEidus it's dafka money things? Well, because it says a few different O's. I think by Shevuos HaEidus it says 2 different O's, right? What does the pasuk say? And by Shevuos HaPikadon it says, right? The thing is, when it comes to Shevuos Bitoy, it also says, so nefesh kisishava levate bisvasayim. So nefesh kisishava levate bisvasayim. Laura later v'chasher yivade. So the Gemara asks that it says there are 2 O's when it comes to Shevuos Bitoy, and Shevuos Bitoy would fit the requirements of something that has a shvuah as well as not having a coin, and it would be Shevuos Bitoy could be about non-monetary things as well. So maybe by Shevuos HaEidus it's also by non-monetary things, because that's learned out from Shevuos Bitoy. So again, to Maskif La Rabba Bar Ula, Rabbi Ula asks Akasha, Bitoy yochich. What about the O's by Shevuos Bitoy? Shein Oin, that they are O's. V'yeshimoen shvuah, and there's also a shvuah, Shevuos Bitoy. V'enimoen koin, and there's no coin by Shevuos Bitoy, right? Mashein kain, like a sota, for example. There's a coin over there. Umidabim shaloi b'tvias mamun, and it's also talking about things that are not, strictly speaking, mamonous, by claims of mammon, like somebody trying to claim money from somebody else. So nonetheless, mistav mi pikadon havale lemelav, but still it makes more sense to learn out Shevuos HaEidus from Shevuos HaPikadon. How come? Because there are 5, I think, similarities between Shevuos HaEidus and Shevuos HaPikadon, whereas there are only 3 similarities between Shevuos HaEidus and Shevuos Bitoy. Shekain techto mi techto. We didn't get there yet, actually. But anyways, we'll get there in a second. Shekain techto mi techto. Better to learn out Shevuos HaEidus from Shevuos HaPikadon, because we have a Gezer Shava techto techto. It says techto by Shevuos HaEidus, and Och it says techto by Shevuos HaPikadon. So therefore, better to learn Shevuos Eidos from Shevuos HaPikadon. Adarabba, fakert. Mi bitoy avalei lemelav, better to learn Shevuos Eidos from Shevuos Bitoy. Shekein chatos mechatos. Both Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos Bitoy are korban chatos, a korban olav yored, which is a chatos, as opposed to Shevuos HaPikadon, which is an osham gzelos. So elam istavra. And this is what I was saying a minute ago. Mi pikadon avalei lemelav, better to learn from pikadon shekein chet b'mezid tovei v'kafrei v'avrei. That chet, that is right, the gzer shav of techta from right between Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos HaPikadon. B'mezid, you are chayiv b'mezid by Shevuos Eidos as well as by Shevuos HaPikadon, which is interesting because we had learned yesterday, according to Reb Shimon's opinion, and it's going to be a big feature in today's joke on Lamed Aleph Beis, a very complicated joke that I think most people will find not to be funny. Al Koponim, it is a highlight of that joke is that Reb Shimon's opinion is that by Shevuos HaPikadon you are potter for Mezid. However, the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Vav Amud Beis, the Mishnah of Shevuos HaPikadon, which we'll get to, God willing, in 2 days, does say that you will be chayiv for Mezid by Shevuos HaPikadon. Just like so by Shevuos Eidos as well as by Shevuos HaPikadon you're chayiv b'mezid masha'ein kain by Shevuos Bitoy, it's only b'shgaga, right? V'ne'elam tovei v'kafrei. Both by Shevuos Eidos and by Shevuos HaPikadon we're talking about where Shimon is making a request and being denied, right? So by Shevuos Eidos we've been saying that Shimon is requesting from Levi and Yehuda, and they're saying that they don't know anything. By Shevuos HaPikadon, Shimon is requesting from Reuven, hey, can you give me back my money or whatever? And in both cases, whether it's Levi and Yehuda or whether it's Reuven, they are denying. There's no denial of anything by Shevuos Bitoy. V'avrei, and it's past tense, right? That by Shevuos Eidos, right, Shimon is requesting from Levi and Yehuda to testify about something that already happened. Also by Shevuos HaPikadon, it's by something that already happened, a loan that already took place, or a deposit, whatever it might be. Whereas by Shevuos Bitoy, right, the main scenario is right, that everybody agrees on is Loharu Lehetiv, right, Lahabo. No, better learn now from Shevuos Bitoy shekein chatos. Both Shevuos Bitoy and Shevuos Eidos are korban chatos. Masha'ein kein Shevuos HaPikadon, which is an osham sheyarda, and also Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos Bitoy are korban olev yored, right? That they are variable offerings, based on what you can afford. Masha'ein kein by Shevuos HaPikadon, it's just always it's a fixed korban osham. Lachomesh, and by Shevuos HaPikadon, by Shevuos HaPikadon you have to add a fifth, right? If Reuven denies, having Shimon's book or something, and he swears about it, and he later admits that he actually has the book, so then he has to pay an additional fifth of its value, right? So he brings a korban and pays back the book and adds a fifth. Masha'ein kain, there's no fifth by Shevuos Bitoy and Shevuos Eidos. Hanach nefishon. We just say, okay, yeah, but those are 3 similarities between Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos Bitoy versus 5, or arguably 4, if you say that Tovei v'Kafrei is one thing. Whatever it is, 4 versus 3, 5 versus 3, whatever it is, there are more similarities between Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos HaPikadon rather than between Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos Bitoy. So therefore, the connection is stronger between Shevuos Eidos and Shevuos HaPikadon, and therefore, just like by Shevuos HaPikadon it's Davka Mammon, so also by Shevuos Eidos it's Davka Mammon. Wow, I was saying that I was hoping that this daf is going to be quicker than the last few days. It's not looking so promising. It's already 10 minutes. We've only explored Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Still Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Galili, Rabbi Shimon is its own thing. I'll go upon him. My throat randomly got very dry today. Yeah, I was eating a bowl of hummus, and then I think after that my throat just got dry. It's like nothing I can do about it. Weird. Akoponim. So today's Yom Yerushalayim, Lamaisa. Lamaisa, today's Yom Yerushalayim. So far it hasn't been too noisy. Alright. Fine. So now, Rabbi Akiva Omer, says Rabbi Akiva, so it says if you will be guilty of one me'ele from these things, yesh me'ele shu chayv, yesh me'ele shu potter. So there are some from these things that you're chayiv for, and some from these things that you are potter for. Okay, tzad, how so? Tavo mamon chayiv tavo davracher potter. That if by Shevuos ha'edos we're talking about mominus, you're going to be chayiv, but for other things you're going to be potter, right? So it says me'ele, so only some things. So to the exclude, right? So we're saying it's limited to Shevuos. Shevuos ha'edos is limited to mammon. Epochano, in fact the Gemara, but why don't we? I'll suggest that we flip it around. Me'ele is saying only from some of these things. Let's say, okay, it's excluded. Mammon is what's excluded, and it's everything else is what's included by Shevuos ha'edos. So, and for the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva in the Rabbi Eliezer Samach. No, Rabbi Akiva is building upon Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Rabbi Akiva is building upon Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Rabbi Eliezer had said, right, the in from Shevuos ha'edos and Shevuos ha'pikodim, to say that it's davka mominus. Rabbi Akiva is on board with that. He says, yeah, I'm with you. It's specifically mominus. Within mominus, there are certain mominus that are going to be, you're going to be chayiv according to Shevuos ha'edos for, and certain mominus you're going to be potter according to Shevuos ha'edos. My benayu, okay, so what's the nafkamina between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer? Okay, what are the things where when Rabbi Eliezer says right, Shevuos ha'edos applies to all mominus, and Rabbi Akiva says only some mominus, so what would be an example of something that Rabbi Eliezer would be mechayiv according to Shevuos ha'edos, and Rabbi Akiva would be potter? Would be potter. Rabbi Akiva would say potter. So my benayu ben Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Akiva benayu mashbia ede karke. Well, if you're mashbia witnesses to testify about property, Rabbi Eliezer would say chayiv because it's mominus. Rabbi Akiva would say potter. Rabbi Eliezer chayav and Rabbi Akiva b'tuin. Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar Hasa mashbia ede karka afilu Rabbi Eliezer b'tuin. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says on daf lamed zayin, I'm going to learn it tomorrow. According to Rabbi Yochanan, Taka says on Laf Lamed Zayin that Rabbi Eliezer says that by Shevuos Karke the Eidim are Pturin for Shevuos ha'edos. So Ma'ika ben Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva, then what would be the difference between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva? Because apparently Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva would agree that there's no korban Shevuos ha'edos by Karke. Ikebenayu Ede Knas. By Ede Knas, right? If you're Mashbia Ede Knas, Rabbi Eliezer would say Chayiv, Rabbi Akiva would say Potter. Okay. Rabbi Yosef Aglili Omer says Rabbi Yosef Aglili v'hu Eid Ora O Yada. So Rabbi Yosef Aglili's opinion was that the pasuk says by Shevuos ha'edos v'hu Eid Ora O Yada. Be'edus ha'meskayemes b're'iyah b'lo yidiyah v'yidiyah b'lo re'iyah. HaKosim v'daber. The pasuk by Shevuos ha'edos is talking about edus that it could be b'yediyah below re'iyah, with knowledge without seeing it. For example, right, we're saying that that's specifically din and mominus. For example, you can have witnesses, right? Levi and Yehuda heard Reuven admit to Shimon that he owes Shimon money. So there they know that Reuven owes Shimon money, even though they didn't see the loan. Alternatively, re'iyah below yediyah, you can have Levi and Yehuda see Shimon give money to Reuven without knowing what the purpose of the money was. Was it a gift? Was it a loan? Does Reuven owe anything back to Shimon? They don't know, but they do know that Shimon gave something to Reuven. So the yediyah below yediyah is specific to mominus. Well, if that's the case, that we're saying that yediyah below yediyah is unique to mominus, well then clearly suggests Rav Papa to Abaye, Rabbi Yosef Aglili must not hold of Reb Acha's, must disagree with Reb Acha when it comes to Mamanis. Why? What does Reb Acha say? Disani that we learn the Brayso Reb Acha, says Reb Acha, Gomala oicher ben agmal. We've seen this a few times, at least twice, I'd say. Bava Basra and in Sanhedrin. So Gomala oicher ben agmalim. If you have a camel that is getting very, very excited, a boy camel that wants that beer with a girl camel, and he's going nuts, and he's basically kicking any other camels that get close. V'nimtza gomal harug b'tzido, and there's a dead camel next to this boy, this kicky, excited boy. So bi'adua shezeh harago. So you can assume that this camel is the one who killed the dead camel. So it's a situation of yediyah below riyah. We didn't see this camel. What should we call this camel? Reuven the camel. We didn't see Reuven the camel kill this dead camel, but we know that he did, because he's been going crazy. He's been running around, driving everybody nuts, and now we see a dead camel. We know that it's Reuven the camel that did it. So yediyah below riyah. So now the Islay Reb Acha. Right, so now if Rabbi Yosef Glili agrees with Rabbi Acha, so Rabbi Yosef Glili said that, well, Yediyah below Yediyah is something that can only be by Mamanis. It can't be by Nefashis. But if Rabbi Yosef Glili agrees with Rabbi Acha that by Mamanis you can have, that by Mamanis you can have Yediyah below Yediyah in such a scenario, where you see, right, basically you see that Reuven the camel is kicking everybody around, and then there's a dead camel, you can assume that he did it. Well, I could bring you a parallel case, an equivalent case for Dinei Nefashis. Meaning, if this theory rings true with Reuven the camel, when it comes to Mamanis, I could describe to you a similar case of Yediyah below Re'iyah by Dinei Nefashis, which would mean that this could be by Dinei Nefashis as well, not just by Dinei Mamanis, right? The Islay Reb Acha, if Rabbi Yosef Glili agrees with Reb Acha, but Dinei Nefashis nami mishkachas la, well then I can find an equivalent case by Dinei Nefashis, Reb Shimon ben Shatach, like Reb Shimon ben Shatach. The Amr Shimon ben Shatach says, Shimon ben Shatach er ben Achamim lo re'isi echad sheratz acher chaveiroi lechurba, that I saw a guy running after another guy into a abandoned house or something. V'ratzti acharv, and I went on the chase. I chased after these two fellows. Umatzasi sayiv biyodoi v'dam mitafte v'harg mefarper. And I went into that chorva, and what did I find? I found that Reuven was chasing Shimon, and I went into that house, and I found Reuven was holding a sword that was dripping with blood, and Shimon was flailing about, dying on the floor. Amarti lo, and I said to Reuven, Roshi, Roshi, who killed Shimon? Oyani oyata, either I did it or you did it, and it's not me. But what can I do that I can't turn you in? Shari Omer Teir, because the Teir says, Al Pishnayim Edim O Shlosha Edim, you must have that I would have to have at least 2 witnesses, and it's only me. Ela Mokum Yiframimcha, but God will pay you back. Amru Lozazu Misham, they said they didn't leave there until a snake bit Reuven Vames and he died. So we see that there is a scenario of Yediyah below Re'iyah by Dinei Nefashis that we just saw by Shimon Shatach. He knew that Reuven committed the murder, even though he didn't see it. Right? Shimon Shatach said, if we had 2 witnesses here, we would take you to court and execute you. But he said, look, I don't have 2 witnesses. Therefore, I just have to rely that God is going to pay you back. But we see that there is a possibility of, if there were 2 witnesses, there is a possibility of Yediyah below Re'iyah by Dinei Nefashis as well. And for the Gemara, yes, but that's only 50% of what we need. Afilutema isle de Rabbi Acha, you could say, sure, Rabbi Yossi Aglili agrees with Rabbi Acha that you can have a situation of Yediyah below Re'iyah, that you know that that Reuven the camel killed the other camel, or you know that Reuven, the person, killed Shimon in the Churva. But Bishlama Yediyah below Re'iyah, Mishkachas Lashur, we just described Yediyah below Re'iyah, knowing who did it. Yediyah below Re'iyah, knowing who did it without having seen the crime. But El Re'iyah below Yediyah, Eichim Mishkachas. How could you have a scenario by Din and Nefashos of Re'iyah below Yediyah, of seeing a murder without knowing details about who got killed? Right? We learn Masechta Sanhedrin. There's all sorts of interrogations. And therefore, basic stuff like, who was the person that got killed, right? Yediyah, knowing who got killed, is going to be an important one. Milo bay meida im Ovid Kechavim or Yisrael harag. Aren't you going to have to know if it was an Ovid Kechavim who was killed or Yisrael? Im Adam Treifa harag or Shalim harag. If the person was a Treifa or if the person was healthy, like these are important stuff to know. So you can't have a scenario of Re'iyah below Yediyah by Nefashos that would lead to conviction. So therefore, Re'iyah below Yediyah only works by Mominus. It won't work by Din Nefashos. Okay, that is Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion. Shmaminik Sav Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So we see that Rabbi Yossi Aglili holds Mashbia Ede Knas Potter. So we see that Rabbi Yossi Aglili must hold that if Shimon is Mashbia Levi and Yehuda to testify that Reuven was ones or mefata his daughter, and therefore he owes him, Shimon, 50 silver coins for a knas, Potter, Levi and Yehuda would be Potter for swearing that they don't know anything. Because if you say Chayev, Nihi de Yediyah below Re'iyah Ashkechon, granted that there could be a Yediyah without a Re'iyah, for example, I don't know, if somehow they kind of didn't actually see the ones or mefata, but they were able to somehow know that it happened. They didn't see it, but they know. They were secluded, and they saw them go in and out of a certain place. And then before she was a basula, now she's not. But Re'iyah below Yediyah, Milaboy Meida Nachus Ba Basisra Ba Basula Ba Beula Ba, but to see it without knowing information like, was it a Nachris or a Bas Yisrael or a Besula or Be'ula Kelu, to see it but not know any other information, that would not be enough. So therefore, from the fact that Yossi Aglili is saying that you can have Yediyah below Re'iyah and Yediyah below Re'iyah and Re'iyah below Yediyah by Dinimamanis, it must be excluding situations like the Knas of Ones Umifate. Yosef Rav Amnuna Kamed Rav Yehuda. Rav Amnuna was sitting before Rav Yehuda. Yosef Rav Yehuda v'Kami Boili, and Rav Yehuda asked the following kasha: Mona minisicha bifnei ploni u floni v'edim roin osu mibachutz. So if Shimon says to Reuven, I gave you 100 zuzes in front of Levi and Yehuda, but the thing is, the witnesses were outside. Rashi says that therefore Reuven wasn't aware that Shimon and Levi and Yehuda were outside. Tosfos Taka talks about it and says that therefore Levi and Yehuda didn't know if it was a gift or if it was a loan. So Rav Yehuda asked Rav Nuna, what's the halacha? And so Amalei Rav Nuna says, well, v'hala matoyin. Well, what does Reuven say? Right? Shimon says, I gave you 100 zuzes in front of Levi and Yehuda. What's he saying? If Reuven says, I don't know what you're talking about, well, and he's obviously lying, because we have witnesses who saw that Shimon gave him 100 zuzes. In Shikli Vididi Shikli, and if he says, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, right. You had given me 100 zuzes as a gift. Thank you very much. Or maybe I had lent you and you were paying me back. But it's mine. Yeah, I know, you're right. You gave me 100 zuzes, but that was my 100 zuzes. If that's the case, then Levi and Yehuda, what are they going to be able to accomplish? They were outside. They didn't, right? It's Re'iyah below Yediyah. They saw that the money was given, but they don't know what for. So they can't, force Reuven to pay Shimon. It could have been a gift. So Rav Hamnuna at ul to. So Rav Yehuda says to Rav Hamnuna, you're a smart guy. You're accepted into the Beis Hamikdash, into the Beis Hamedrash of Pumbedisa. Ha'uda Amalei Lechavrei. Shimon says to Reuven, Mana manisi lach b'tzad amud zeh. Reuven, I gave you 100 zuzes next to a certain pillar. Amalei lo avarti b'tzad amud zeh. Reuven says, I never passed by this pillar. Osutre Sadeh, and come Levi and Yehuda, and they say, oh yes you do. Yes, you definitely did pass by that pillar. You know how we know? Because that pillar is outside of our house. And you, son of a gun, you urinated on that pillar. We saw you urinate on that pillar. What do you think this is, a bathroom? I bet it was probably right outside my house, at the gate probably outside my house. They must have been peeing at that gate by my house since the time of the Beis Hamikdash. That's why power washing, it doesn't make a difference. Sorry, it's a sensitive topic. Sorry, got a little carried away. Okay, let's do it again. Start over. Shimon says to Reuven, Mana manisi lach b'tzad amud zeh. I gave you 100 zuzas next to this column. And Reuven says, what do you mean? I've never been to this column. Also, and Levi knew to come and say, oh yes, you have the hishtin mayim b'tzad amud zeh. You peed on that amud. Omar Rish Lakish uchza kafin. So Rish Lakish says, well, he said he had never been there. Busted. Caught with his pants down. Maskiv la Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman, however, asks a question. Haidina parso meh. This is backwards to say that he would be chayiv for that. Mikamer me olam. Did he say that I never passed by this column? Be'esek zeh. He was saying I never passed by this column and never borrowed money from anybody or took money from anybody next to this column. Did I pee there? Yeah, I guess. You could answer those who say, Shimon says to so Shimon says to Reuven, I gave you 100 zuzas next to this column. Reuven says, I never passed by this column. Nafkubei Side, Levi and Yehuda come, that he peed by this Amud. Rav Nachman, who's a kafir, Rav Nachman says, he's a liar. Rav Nachman, Rav sister of Nachman, called Milsa, Dilo Ramya Ole de Inish, Ovid La Vilav Adaite. That Rav sister of Nachman, give him a break. The guy pees several times a day. He doesn't remember every last place that he peed. So he says, So he says, I've never been there. Levi knew to come say, oh yeah, you peed there. Rabbi says, okay, give him a break. He doesn't remember that he peed there. Alright, fine. But we remember, the people who live there remember. Let's go weiter. So now we get to the joke. Now the rest of the daf is going to be trying to figure out this joke. Chevra, this joke doesn't disappoint. I guess it's probably what you can basically imagine a joke in the Gemara would be. Very, very complicated. I mean, not extremely complicated, but usually a joke is you don't have to think too much about it. It's a quick, cute little thing with a nice punchline, you get a laugh. This joke is not funny. This joke, you can imagine the Gemara trying to tell a joke. That you call that funny? How does it make sense? Because okay, if you want to be funny, this is whatever. That's not funny. There's this problem. Every time you try to be funny, it's it's not funny. I have three kashas. Why I don't understand the joke. I guess that's the thing, right? They say if you have to explain a joke, it's not very funny. Listen, this joke needs explaining big time. We're literally going to try to explain it for the next 20 minutes, however longer this takes. Reb Shimon Omer, Chayiv kam v'chayiv b'pikadon chulei. So Reb Shimon says that, how do we know that by Shevuos HaEdus it's by Mominus? So essentially we learn it out from, it is important. So first, he said, you're Chayiv by Shevuos HaEdus and you're Chayiv by Shevuos HaPikadon. So just like Shevuos HaPikadon is Mominus, so also Shevuos HaEdus is Mominus. And he says also you can learn it out from a Kal V'chomer, that if by Shevuos HaEdus, which is, if by Shevuos HaPikadon, which is like men and women, kosher, puzzle, kara, rachok, all sorts of stuff, and yet it's limited to Mominus, well, Shevuos HaEdus, which is already limited on who it applies to, certainly would also be limited, at least to just Dini Mominus. Now, then we say, but you can't necessarily bring that proof because I could say that Shevuos HaPikadon to begin with is actually, in a certain respect, more limited in that Mushba Mipi Acherim is, right, you're only Chayiv for Mushba Mipi Atzmo, not for Mushba Mipi Acherim. Also, you're only Chayiv for Shogeg, you're Potter for Mezid, whereas by Shevuos HaEdus, you're Chayiv for Shogeg and Mezid. You're Chayiv for Mushba Mipi Atzmo as well as Mushba Mipi Acherim. So in that sense, you could say that actually Shevuos HaPikadon is more limited, and therefore it makes sense that it's also limited to Dini Mominus, but I can argue that Shevuos HaEdus should be more than just Dini Mominus. So Mochaku Ola b'Mayrov. So in Eretz Yisrael they laughed at Reb Shimon's opinion. I think we had said in Masechet Sanhedrin that when it says Mochaku Ola b'Mayrov, it's Reb Yossi, Reb Chanina. Okay. My chucha. What's so funny? The Gemara wants to understand what is so funny about Reb Shimon's opinion. The Katani, Mali Pikadon Shekain, Lo Asaba Mushba Kanishba Mezid Kashogeg. I'll tell you what's so funny. What's so funny is that Reb Shimon had said that by Shevuos HaPikadon, where am I? Fine. Lo Asaba Mushba Kanishba. That by Shevuos HaPikadon, Mushba Mipi Acherim is Potter. Right? Mushba is not like Nishba. Nishba Mipi Atzmo is Chayiv by Shevuos HaPikadon, but Mushba Mipi Acherim is Potter. Mezid Kishogeg, and also Mezid is not like Shogeg. By Shevuos HaPikadon, you Chayiv for Shogeg, but Potter for Mezid. That is what Reb Shimon said. And it's funny because it doesn't make any sense according to the joke. According to Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, according to Machaku Ola b'Mayrov. Why doesn't it make sense? Mirdei mushba mipi atzmoi be'edus lo Reb Shimon minolei. Well, how does Reb Shimon know that by Shevuos HaEdus there's mushba mipi atzmo? Because if you look at the Psukim, it all says it's Shama Kol Ola, which we said is mushba mipi acherim. So how do we know mushba mipi atzmo by Shevuos HaEdus? How do you know Mushba Mipi Atzmo by Shevuos HaEdus? The Gomer Mipi Pikadon. Well, it's learned out from Gzeira Shava from Pikadon. Or even if we didn't necessarily say Gzeira Shava. Does he say? One second. The Gomer Mipi Pikadon. Gzeira Shava. Okay, so Rashi says Gzeira Shava. Sasa Gzeira Shava. From Gzeira Shava from Pikadon. Right. That just like by Pikadon. Shevuos HaPikadon is Mipi Atzmo. So also by Shevuos HaEdus it's Mipi Atzmo. So if that's the case that we have the Gzeira Shava, well then the Gzeira Shava works both ways. We're also then going to learn out Shevuos HaPikadon from Shevuos HaEdus. So Pikadon Ami Mushba Mipi Acherim Nigmar Me'edus. So then we should say that just like by Shevuos HaEdus there's Mushba Mipi Acherim, so then also by Shevuos HaPikadon there should be Mushba Mipi Acherim. And therefore that is what is so funny. What is so funny is I don't understand why Reb Shimon says that by Shevuos HaPikadon you're only Chai for Mushba Mipi Atzmo and not for Mushba Mipi Acherim. We should learn the Gzeira Shava and say that by Shevuos HaPikadon you're also Chai for Mushba Mipi Acherim. Why is that funny? Dilma, Reb Shimon, B'Kal V'chomer Maisi Lo. Maybe Reb Shimon doesn't hold of the Kal v'chomer between Shevuos Eidus and Shevuos HaPikadon. Maybe how does Reb Shimon know that by Shevuos Eidus you're chayiv for mushba mipi atzmo, even though the pasuk only says v'shama kol Allah, which is mushba mipi acherim? How does Reb Shimon know that by Shevuos Eidus you're also chayiv for mushba mipi atzmo? A simple kal v'chomer. Mipi acherim chayiv. If you're chayiv by Shevuos Eidus mipi acherim, when somebody else swears you, well, then certainly mipi atzmo l'kolshkin. Certainly, if you swear yourself, you should be chayiv. So maybe I don't need to learn that out from Shevuos HaPikadon. Maybe I can just simply use a kal v'chomer to say that by Shevuos Eidus you're chayiv for mushba mipi atzmo. And therefore, again, what is so funny? Right? You're saying Reb Shimon's opinion doesn't make sense. What doesn't make sense? Well, he says that by Shevuos HaPikadon you're only chayiv for mushba mipi atzmo, not for mushba mipi acherim. That's not so funny. Yeah, I can explain why. Because mushba mipi atzmo by Shevuos Eidus is only from a kal v'chomer. There's not necessarily a gzeira shava to between Shevuos Eidus and Shevuos HaPikadon. Selachucha amazing kishogeg. Okay, rather, what's so funny is that Reb Shimon says that by Shevuos HaPikadon you're only chayiv for shogeg, but not for mezid, and that makes no sense. That we say that by pikadon mushba, right, you're potter for mushba, you're only chayiv for nishba, and also you're only chayiv for shogeg, you're potter for mezid. So mirde mezid gabe eidos minale. Well, by Shevuos Eidus, how do you know that you're chayiv for mezid? Tiloksiv be v'nelim. Well, because it doesn't say v'nelim. So since it doesn't say v'nelim by Shevuos Eidus, so therefore it means that you're chayiv for, right? There's no requirement that it be v'nelim, a lapse, a shogeg. Therefore, you'd be chayiv for mezid. Well, hachanami loksiv be v'nelim. Well, there's also no v'nelim by Shevuos HaPikadon, and therefore you should be chayiv for mezid. And that's what's funny. We're laughing at Reb Shimon's opinion because he says that you're potter by Shevuos HaPikadon for mezid, and yet it makes no sense because the only reason, because since by Shevuos HaPikadon it doesn't say v'nelim, so there's no reason to limit it to shogeg, and therefore you should be chayiv for mezid. It's funny that Reb Shimon is saying that you are potter for mezid. But Omer of Una says Rav Huna umay chucha. Why is that so funny? Dilma mezid delav kishogeg bepikadon mimeila Reb Shimon Gamala. Yes, but I can explain to you why Reb Shimon says that by Shevuos HaPikadon mezid is potter. I can explain to you why Reb Shimon says that mezid is potter by Shevuos HaPikadon. The reason being that he learns it out from Me'ila. Why learn it out from Me'ila? Well, because if you look at the pasuk by Shevuos HaPikadon, what does it say? Nefesh kisechla u'mo'alo ma'al ba'ashem v'kichish ba'amito, etc. Just like by Me'ila it says Nefesh kisimol ma'al. Mo'ala ma'al, simol ma'al. Right there, right. So let's say that, okay, it seems that there is a Me'ila kind of aspect to Shevuos HaPikadon. And therefore, just like by Me'ila, an Ashur Me'ilos is only B'shogeg, so also a Korban Ashur Gezelos by Shevuos HaPikadon is also only B'shogeg, not B'mezid. Okay, so we want to say what's so funny about Reb Shimon's opinion is that he says that by Shevuos HaPikadon you're potter for mezid. It's actually not so funny because I can explain to you why you're potter for mezid. Because it says Me'ila by Shevuos HaPikadon, and just like by Me'ila you're potter for mezid, so also by Shevuos HaPikadon you're potter for mezid. So okay, fine, but this is what's funny. Well, why is he learning it out from Me'ila? He should learn it out from Shevuos HaEidus and say that just like by Shevuos HaEidus you're chayiv for mezid, so also by Shevuos HaPikadon you're chayiv for mezid. Mistav mi Me'ila v'le le'meilav shekem Me'ila mi Me'ila. The Gemara says, yeah, but it makes more sense to learn out Shevuos HaPikadon from Me'ilah, because it says, as I pointed out, it says by Shevuos HaPikadon Umar Lamal, and it says by Me'ilah Kisimo Ma'al. So therefore, it says Me'ilah by both of them. So learn them out from each other to exclude Mezid. Adarabba Me'edus Avalei Lemelef Fakert. Learn it out from Shevuos HaEdus. Sheken Techto Mitechto. If Gzeir Shava, it says Techto by Shevuos HaEdus, and it says Techto by Shevuos HaPikadon. And therefore, we should say that you're chayiv for Mezid by Shevuos HaPikadon. To which we say, well, it makes more sense to learn out Shevuos HaPikadon from Me'ilah because Shekain Me'ilah Bakol Nene Bikavua Chomesh Ve'oshim. Adrab Me'edus Avdei Le'melev Shekain Chet Hedjid B'Shvua Tave V'Kofrei Ve'oin Hanach Nefishim. Let's read that again. So the Gemara says, well, it makes more sense to learn out Shevuos HaPikadon from Me'ilah because Shekain Me'ilah, they're both Me'ilah, right? They say Me'ilah both by Shevuos HaPikadon and by Me'ilah. Bakol, they apply to everybody, men, women, relatives, non-relatives, etc. Nene, and you're getting benefit, right? By Me'ilah, the whole thing is that you get benefit from Hektish. By Shevuos HaPikadon, the whole thing is that you're denying that you have something so you can keep it for yourself and benefit from it. Bikavua, it's a korban kavua, it's not a korban olav yored, rather both cases are in asham. Chomesh, in both cases, when you lie, in both cases, you have to add a fifth, right? When you get Me'ilah, you have to bring a korban and also, I guess, give to the treasury, the value of the benefit plus a fifth. I think that's the point. Or let's say you maybe accidentally eat. Okay, I'm not getting into that. Okay, and then also by Shevuos HaPikadon, when you lie about having something, you say you don't have it, then you admit that you do, you have to pay back the thing and add a fifth. V'ashim, and in both cases, they are korban ashim, right? We had said two items earlier, b'kavua, that they're both a korban kavua, and that korban kavua is that they are both in ashim. Adrab me'edus avalei lemelef. No, let's learn out Shevuos HaPikadon from Shevuos HaEdus. Shkein chet, right? They have the gzeir shav of techta. Hedjit, also, right, they're non-hektish, right? Me'ilah specifically by hektish, whereas Shevuos HaPikadon, Shevuos HaEdus, those are just even by non-hektish things. B'Shvua, both of them we're talking about a Shvua, right? Shevuos HaEdus, Shevuos HaPikadon. Tave v'Kofrei, there is a claim and a denial, right? In both cases, as we explained earlier, right? By Shevuos HaEdus, Shimon is going to Levi and Yehuda and they are denying, or by Shevuos HaPikadon, Shimon is going to Reuven and he's denying. The O-in, they also have the O-Os. Hanach Nefishin, to which the Gemara answers, these are more, right? In order for so there are more similarities between Shevuos HaPikadon and Me'ilah than there are between Shevuos HaPikadon and Shevuos HaEdus. And in order for that to be true, Taveh v'Kafrei has to be counted as one item by Shevuos HaEdus, by the similarities of Shevuos HaEdus. Okay, fine. So therefore, it makes sense to learn out Shevuos HaPikadon from Me'ilah to say that you are pater for Mezid. Okay, so again, so then what is so bloody funny, right? We tried to say, well, what's funny is that Reb Shimon says that there's no mushba mipi acherim by Shevuos HaPikadon. So which you say, well, that actually can make sense. If you say there's no Gezer Shava, then there's no Shevuos, then there's no Mushba M'Piachim by Shevuos HaPikadon. And then we said that, well, what's funny is that Reb Shimon says that you're pater for Mezid. To which we say, well, yeah, that's because he learns out Shevuos HaPikadon from Me'ilah. So what is so funny? What's so funny? Ki Asar HaPape, when a Pape came, Rav Huna Ber Yeshua, when Pape and Rav Huna Ber Yeshua came, from the base of Medrash, they said, this is what's funny. Reb Shimon, Gezer Shava Gomer. Well, ultimately, Reb Shimon learns Gezer Shava. Right? Ultimately, right, he tried to learn it from the Kavachomer. They said, right, we said, well, it's not really Kavachomer because by Shevuos HaPikadon, it's actually more strict. As we said, there's no Mushba Kanishba, there's no Mezid Kishoge. Therefore, it makes sense that it's limited to Dinim Ominous. To which we said, to which we said, ultimately, Techta. There's a Gezer Shava, and that is how we know that Shevuos HaEdus is limited to to Mamanis, because it says Techto by Shevuos Eidos, Techto by Shevuos HaPikadon. Shevuos HaPikadon is specifically Mamanis, so also Shevuos Eidos is specifically Mammon. So now, once we learn the Gezerah Shava, so Lama Le De Parich Mala Pikadon Sheken Lo Asa Bo Mushba Kanishba Mezik Shogeg. Once already we have this Gezerah Shava, well now, after we have this Gezerah Shava, this opinion of Reb Shimon is funny, because now that we have the Gezerah Shava, I don't understand why we would say that Mushba is not Kanishba. Why Mezid is not Kishogeg. If we have this Gezerah Shava between Shevuos HaEdus and Shevuos HaPikadon, I would say that just like there's Mushba and Piacherim by Shevuos HaEdus, there should also be Mushba and Piacherim by Shevuos HaPikadon. Just like you Chayiv b'Mezid by Shevuos HaEdus, you should also be Chayiv b'Mezid by Shevuos HaPikadon. So what's funny is that now that we have this Gezerah Shava, reflecting on Reb Shimon's opinion that Mushba is not Kanishba, that Mezid is not Kishogeg, that is funny. Why is that so funny? Why is that so funny? Dilma, ki parich mikam desekum le Gezerah Shava. Well, maybe when Reb Shimon said that, well, you could say that by Shevuos HaPikadon, that when Reb Shimon says that by Shevuos HaPikadon, Mushba is not Kanishba, Mezid is not Kishogeg, that was before the Gezerah Shava, but Basar de Kama le Gezerah Shava lo Parich. But once already established that there's this Gezerah Shava, he no longer asked these questions. Once there was the Gezerah Shava, he accepted that by Shevuos HaPikadon, Mushba is Kanishba and Mezid is Kishogeg. Vilo, but is that really the case? But Va'amar Luhu, Rava Bar Itai the Rabban, Rava Bar Itai says to the Rabban, Mantana, who is the opinion who holds? Who's the Tana who holds Shevuos HaPikadon? When it comes to Shevuos HaPikadon, lo nitan zdona l'chapara. That whose opinion is that Shevuos HaPikadon is not shaykh to Mezid, Reb Shimoni, and the answer is it's Reb Shimon's opinion. So we see that ultimately Reb Shimon's opinion is that by Shevuos HaPikadon there's no korban Shevuos HaPikadon for Mezid, even after the Gezerah Shava. Ultimately, Reb Shimon's opinion is, that he's known for, is that Shevuos HaPikadon is not shaykh to Mezid, even after the Gezerah Shava. That's weird. It's funny. Dilma Mezid Kishogeg Parich Degam Meila Tanach Nefishin, to which we say maybe it's not that funny. I can say, look, yes, there's a Gezerah Shava between Shevuos HaEdus and Shevuos HaPikadon. Right? Let's go back for a second. About Mushba Kanishba Lo Parich. That meaning, yes, we have this Gezerah Shava of Techta from Shevuos HaEdus, right, between Shevuos HaEdus and Shevuos HaPikadon. Maybe that Gezerah Shava is what teaches that Mushba is Kanishba by Shevuos HaPikadon. And once we've established the Gezerah Shava, Reb Shimon would be on board with that. That now that we have the Gezerah Shava between Shevuos HaEdus and Shevuos HaPikadon, so then yes, by Shevuos HaPikadon, Mushba is Kanishba, and he will never say otherwise. However, he would still hold, that Shevuos HaPikadon is not shaykh to Mezid because of the Me'ilah connection. And after we said there are more similarities to Me'ilah than there are to Shevuos HaEdus, and therefore, when it comes to Mezid, he holds like by Me'ilah that you potter for Mezid by Shevuos HaPikadon. However, he would still hold the Gezerah Shava legabe Mushba Kanishba. So now, frag the Gemara v'tahader Edus v'tigmar la mipikadon Mezid delav kishogeg ma pikadon shogeg in Mezid lo af Edus shogeg in Mezid lo. Frag the Gemara. Well, now once we're saying that by Shevuos HaPikadon there's no Mezid because Shevuos HaPikadon is learned from Me'ilah, and therefore by Shevuos HaPikadon there's no Mezid. Well, now that we have the Gezerah Shava between Shevuos HaEdus and Shevuos HaPikadon, let's say that just like by Shevuos HaPikadon there's no Mezid, so also by Shevuos HaEdus there's no Mezid. Right? I'm going to read that again. V'ti'ader Edus. Let's now take Shevuos HaEdus v'tikamer la mipikadon and learn Shevuos HaEdus from Shevuos HaPikadon because of the Gezerah Shava. Mezid de lav kishogeg, and say that Mezid by Shevuos HaEdus, you're potter. It's not kishogeg. You're potter for Mezid by Shevuos HaEdus. Ma pikodin shogeg in mezid lo. Just like by pikodin, it's only by shogeg and not by mezid. So if edus shogeg in mezid lo, we'll say also by Shevuos edus, it's only for shogeg, it's not for mezid. So keichid the telef pikodin b'mila, right? Just like pikodin is learned out from meila, so we'll also learn out Shevuos edus from Shevuos hapikodin. So and for the Gemara, la'achi kosva rachmano le'edus gabe Shevuos bitoy. Yeah, but that is why Shevuos edus is specifically written next to Shevuos bitoy. V'gabe tumas mikdash v'kodashov and Shevuos and tumas mikdash v'kodashov. Debechulin nemar ben v'nelam v'kan lo nemar ben lelam. That by tumas mikdash v'kodashov and Shevuos bitoy, it says v'nelam, and Shevuos ha'edus, which is written together with them, doesn't say v'nelam. L'chayiv al mezid kishogeg is deliberately to make a point that by Shevuos edus it is not limited to shogeg, but that it also applies to mezid. So specifically by Shevuos edus you would be chayiv for mezid, but apparently the joke was not so much of a joke. All right, maybe another time. Okay, I'm running out of time over here on the video. So yeah, this was an interesting daf. We basically dug into all the opinions that we got to at the end of the daf yesterday about how do we know that Shevuos, that Shevuos edus is limited to dini mominus, and we kind of dug into those things and we tried to figure out what was so funny about Reb Shimon's opinion. Peace out.